it's ground up somehow. I happen to have a doctor that was like an allopathic, that also had homeopathic. So she was like a very natural kind of thing. And so she was a big proponent of, and she was endocrine as well. She was a big proponent of natural. So that's why I went that way.
Okay. So uh, I'll just give like a moment's worth of background for the last maybe month on Minerva Academy. We've been talking about what contemporary economists call the curse of wealth. And this is finding about 21st century capitalism, which is that we really don't um, generate wealth without generating inequality in the 21st century. And there's a lot of technical economics research. I'm just going to ask people to accept on faith and also look around us. And if you do history, you can compare the level of inequality in the United States in the 1950s, where to take a simple illustration, the most expensive car might have cost maybe 4 or 5 times as much as a kind of standard middle class vehicle, and now it's hundreds of times more. And we could keep going with clothes and bags and shoes and jewelry and cars, etc. And so I've got a couple pieces of art, one representing a more exclusive, one representing a more cooperative economy. And the question that I'm getting to at this point in the series of classes, they're an hour each Sunday, and so this has been going on since almost the beginning of the year, is what we can do about it. And so very quickly, like I say, I got to skip through some slides. This is kind of the technical economics about why there's so much inequality. This is a little bit about what that inequality is doing to us, and this is a measure of economic well-being that takes into account a whole bunch of factors. And as you can see, the level of economic well-being in the United States is 4.91 on a scale of 10. Most people are not very happy with the economy we have in the United States in the 21st century. As one simple way of part of what I'm trying to do is to figure out how we can build consensus that we need to address this. So partisan polarization is an impediment. And if we start from a partisan perspective, I'm right, they're wrong, we just don't listen to each other anymore. We're never going to get very far that way. So one thing I assume maybe we can agree about is that we should care about child well-being. And the issue here, right, is that in more equal societies, on a using a UNICEF metrics of child well-being, children do much better. In more unequal societies like ours, children are much worse off. If we start from the proposition that people are responsible for their own economic fate. Not a proposition I fully believe in, but if we start from that proposition, nevertheless, I don't think we hold children responsible for their parents' economic fate. And so part of the reason to focus here just for a second is to say, look, even if you don't care about the poor per se, is it a good society in which 40% of our children are food insecure, don't get as many calories as pediatricians recommend they should get in order to flourish, right? That doesn't seem like the hallmark of the richest society in the world or something we should be proud of. Maybe we can agree we should do something about that. Uh, our society is much less mobile than it used to be. Economic mobility, it's much harder if you're from a poor family to end up middle class or rich than it used to be. More equal societies have greater mobility, and parental stress is much higher, especially for the poor. And we know this leads to less good parenting, more neglect of children. The result of all of this is kind of where we left off last week. Um, Even the very rich in high inequality societies are feeling levels of stress and anxiety that are actually as high as the middle class in the medium inequality societies and as the poor in the low inequality societies. And so again, if we're just being self-interested about this, we should want to do something about it. But here's my basic approach. This is where these lectures are now turning to, having done a lot of the technical, economic, psychological, public health work to establish there are structural reasons we're becoming more unequal, that greater inequality is affecting us in all kinds of negative ways. What can we do about it? And my simple suggestion, and I'm going to be really brief about this, is first we need to have a conversation about values. Why should we want the kind of economy we have? What should we want out of it? Do we just want more income, more wealth, more jobs, more growth, more productivity? Or is that a surrogate for other values, greater security, greater community, greater trust, greater health, greater comfort? And if so, if we don't just want more growth, but a humane economy, what values should we use to regulate the economy? And so I'm starting to talk through these topics about potential places of convergence, areas of consensus or agreement. We are polarized because we focus so much on our political identities. What if we shifted the conversation to try to talk about values that we have in common? And so that's the starting point for then recommending an experimental approach to doing better with our economy, having an economy that makes people happier, that increases well-being, that increases health, that increases trust, that increases cooperation. And so my suggestion is that we need to begin to talk through experiments in policies. And my model, my exemplar here is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who, inheriting the Great Depression in the early 1930s, described his administration's approach as throwing spaghetti at the wall. And by that he meant, right, there's this old wives' tale, when you want to see if your spaghetti is done, you throw it at the wall, and if it sticks, then it's done, time to drain it. And the basic idea here is see what sticks. Try a whole bunch of different things. If it works, develop it. If it doesn't work, move on. And I think we need to be a little bit less um, aggressive and sure about our policy proposals, a little bit more humble about them, and say, we don't really know what would work for a 21st century economy. Let's start experimenting at the local level, at the regional level, at the state level, before we adopt things at a national. Now, having said that, very quickly, I want to point to a couple other things, and I'm going to bypass a lot of what I'll be talking about in the longer lectures in terms of models of creating a positive feedback loop in public policy. I just want to focus on poverty for 1 minute and then on wealth for 1 minute. So what these diagrams show is that since the Great Society initiatives of the 1960s, the poverty rate has been stubbornly persistent, never really going above 15%, never going below 10% in the United States for 50 years. The number of poor people has gone up because the number of Americans has gone up. So we now have 40 million poor people in the United States. And that means a family of four living on $13,000 a year or less. We've driven poverty for the elderly down because of Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare. But having said that, for young people, actually the rate of poverty, right? The number of children living in families trying to support themselves on less than $15,000 a year, that's 20% of our children. This is, I think, again, a scandal, a sin, a crime that in the richest country in the history of humanity, we have 20%, 1 in 5 children growing up in desperate poverty. I won't focus on this. Poverty causes a whole bunch of harms, especially to children. What I want to focus on instead for just a moment is this, which is that in 2021, we had the single best year for reducing poverty in the United States going back 50 years. All of these other reductions and increases are driven just by normal economic cycles. The economy grows, poverty goes down, then a recession comes, poverty goes back up. In 2021, thanks to COVID relief, we essentially drove poverty down 4 times more than we had in the previous 50 years. And we did it through simple policy measures that we could easily implement again and that cost a tiny little fraction of what the IRS fails to collect in taxes each year because people are illegally parking their money in places the IRS has a hard time getting its hands on it. So that would be one thing we could experiment with and see what it's like to not just do this for a year, but maybe to do this for a decade. What would our society be like if we really aggressively tried to eliminate desperate poverty? There would be fewer homeless people on the streets. There would be less crime. There would be less need to spend on welfare. There would be less people turning up in emergency rooms because they didn't have medical insurance. I'm willing to wager with anybody who wants to take the bet. If we did this, we would save money. It wouldn't cost us more money. And by the way, our streets would be safer. Our communities would be more cooperative and trusting. It would be a better America, and we would never want to go back again. One more thing I want you to consider, and again, I'm going through a lot of slides that I could spend a lot of time in terms of tax policy on, but I want to get to this. And very quickly, this is research on income inequality and wealth inequality. And I think one of the really striking things in this research is that we created a middle class. And when I say we did it via public policy, especially policy to support home ownership for people who were locked out of home ownership in the middle of, I'm sorry, at the beginning of the 20th century. We addressed this in the middle of the 20th century. And the result is we've created a stable middle class that is about 40% of our population. Could we do this again? And I'm just going to show Thomas Piketty, leading candidate for a Nobel Prize in economics, his simple solution. And that is a inheritance tax. Basic idea is you tax inheritance based on the multiple of the average income. If you're only getting half of the average inheritance, very low tax. If you're getting 10 times the average inheritance, tax it 5%, right? But if you're getting 10,000 times the average inheritance, and by the way, in the United States, that's about 400,000 is the average inheritance. So we're talking about people who are inheriting 4 billion or more, then you get a high tax, right? And you use that tax to create inheritance for everyone. 200,000 per person is a rough thought, and give that to people in their 20s, let them finance their education, their first home purchase, starting a business, starting their family. This could be transformative in terms of truly creating a middle-class society. Again, I want to be as clear as possible. I'm not saying I've got silver bullet answers. I don't think anybody does. Start experimenting along these lines. Let's start with a value conversation, not with a policy conversation, and then experimentally move from there to values.
I love the fact that this billionaire lady gave like $1 billion to the Albert Einstein Med School, and now all the doctors from there will be taught free of cost. So I like those kind of billionaires, but I know you're asking and suggesting a billionaire tax. I don't know if that will ever happen.
Well, tax on when people try to pass more than $1 billion down to their children, not on the billionaires per se, but on the inheritance of billions of dollars. And I didn't go through the details of the values, but one of the values is not having so much wealth and power that it makes us fundamentally unequal. People talk about this as deconcentrating wealth. And by the way, that's where the United States was at our founding. That's where the United States was for much of the 19th century. That's where the United States was for the middle of the 20th century. We're not talking about something un-American. I think we're talking about something American that we lost track of by letting there be such large fortunes.
Yeah.
But
Okay, I'm going to turn this computer off. I'm going to come sit with you guys.
Yes, please come.
Yay.
Yay.
So instead of slides, what you have is my notes.
Yes.
Otherwise, I would never be ready for this presentation. We're going to talk about the thyroid gland. Just want to give you a reminder. First of all, let me say that my day-to-day livelihood is in kidney disease and secondarily in primary care, and I do deal with some thyroid questions, but I am not an endocrinologist, but I do look at the endocrine system as a thing of biology that I'm kind of fascinated with, because the endocrine system is a way of us responding to our environment. Our nervous system helps us to react to the environment from moment to moment, minute to minute.
Bow tie.
That's your bow tie, David. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's your thyroid. Yeah.
So some of the things that I didn't really get a chance to look at is, does our thyroid gland help us to react to the environment? So these are for maybe another day. It would be more adventurous to look into that and see what does our thyroid gland do for us from day to day in responding to the environment. David spoke about a lot of stressful things, and I wonder if my thyroid gland is being affected by that. So this is the thyroid gland. It's in front of our trachea, a little bit below the larynx, and most of the time we're not aware that it's there. A physical exam should really feel not much, especially in my practice. If I'm not seeing anybody for thyroid disease, I don't really dwell too much unless there's some obvious asymmetry in the neck. So there it sits, and behind it there are parathyroid glands. I just want to mention that because there's a difference between what they do, but the thyroid gland is like a bow tie. So I took some notes, and I have to credit the Cleveland Clinic website because it has a very straightforward language explaining what the thyroid does. And I thought, I don't have to reinvent the wheel. So I trimmed down some of their text and made into these notes. The thyroid gland being an endocrine gland, it secretes hormones, and that's what our glands do. And basically, a hormone is a chemical which is excreted by or secreted by a gland, which acts at a distance on other tissues in our body.
It's like a Wi-Fi signal inside your body.
I know. The more we have technology evolving, we have ways of comparing what the body does. The amazing thing is that all that is done through living tissue in a very tiny little space, handling information more efficiently than, let's say, a computer, which would never fit in the space where the thyroid gland is. So these cells are very smart and react. And I'm calling them smart because a lot of times we talk about these glands as if they have the power to think. For instance, the thyroid gland, they say, is there to control our metabolism. The thyroid gland really doesn't, I guess it's a consequence of its actions that it controls our metabolism, but it doesn't really process information in any kind of esoteric way like a Wi-Fi would allow us to do with an AI. But there it is. The thyroid has hormones that it releases, which controls our metabolism. And there's a definition of metabolism which I couldn't help but copy. It's a process where the food we consume in our body is transformed into energy. And this energy now is used to help all the different tissues and organs to work properly. So that is what the thyroid does. So when we go day to day in health, the thyroid gland is maintaining how fast we metabolize different nutrients and responding to our energy consumption. So how does it do it? The specific hormones of the thyroid gland are thyroxine, which we abbreviate as T4 because it has 4 iodine atoms in the molecule, and T3 because it has 3 iodine atoms on the molecule. And maintaining a balance of the right amount of hormones in our body, in our bloodstream, is what gives us what is a steady metabolic rate. So thyroid disease has a few definitions, but the main thing that we talk about in the thyroid, let me see, basically, the thyroid is important from birth. It tends to be more, if people don't have it at birth, the incidence of thyroid disease tends to be more as we age. And it seems to have more sex predominance affecting women more than men. And there's a little blurb there that women are about 5 to 8 times more likely to have a thyroid condition than men. So who's at risk for thyroid disease? A few things have been identified. Having a family history for sure. Sometimes it reassures us that we know what we're dealing with if we ask, anybody else in your family has thyroid condition. But then also it looks like some other conditions predispose some people. It's not unusual to have people, as they say here, pernicious anemia or type 1 diabetes, adrenal insufficiency, lupus, Sjogren's syndrome, rheumatoid, and Turner syndrome, to have thyroid problems. Some medications, like very famously amiodarone, which is a heart medication, can cause thyroid abnormalities, and being older, especially women. And also being treated for thyroid, because sometimes the treatment involves destroying tissue or removing tissue. So some people tend to have problems later on in their thyroid. Earlier, I looked at the most common cause of death in this country, and thyroid is nowhere near here. It's not on this list of top causes of mortality. However, it is a significant medical condition. Certainly, it's significant for the person who has it. It necessitates the inconvenience of following up with doctors and getting tests. So it's not really bad news. And I don't think anybody takes it as bad news when somebody has a thyroid condition. I also saw an interesting article that said that, well, two things. One is all-cause mortality is slightly higher in people who are being treated with thyroxine, who are being treated for thyroid. It's a slight excess in mortality, and I don't think they identify any cause. But this source here in American Thyroid Association says that hyperthyroid, when the thyroid works in excess of what we need is more associated with risk of cardiac injury. Whereas, well, I'll have to go to some definitions. What's called subclinical thyroidism, hypothyroidism, is for some reason people have less all-cause mortality. So I'm gonna go to some definitions. When people have thyroid conditions, it could be hypo, meaning that the thyroid gland is not active enough to maintain a metabolic rate, a normal metabolic rate. And these people usually require replacement with thyroid supplements. And then there's another condition, which is subclinical hypothyroidism. Subclinical means the only abnormality is the blood test, and it's not clear whether this condition needs to be treated or not. And then there's obvious hypothyroidism where people have symptoms because of low levels of the thyroid hormone. I'll probably mention this again in a bit.
Yes.
So the pituitary is a gland which is at the base of the brain, which controls the activity of many other glands, and it does control the activity of the thyroid. Suffice it to say, the pituitary has cells that can sense whether we have high levels of thyroid hormones or low level of thyroid hormones. I like to compare it to a thermostat. If the thyroid hormone is high, then the pituitary responds to that. And if the thyroid hormone is low, the pituitary responds by secreting a stimulating hormone, TSH. And TSH is really very convenient way to know the state of things with the thyroid. And that's where the discussion of subclinical hypothyroid comes into existence, because the idea is that the pituitary will respond with a high TSH if there's not enough thyroid hormone, but sometimes the TSH is high, which would make you think that there's not enough thyroid. But when you do a T4 level or T3 level, you'll notice that they're within normal range. So some people have described it as the high TSH is really like stepping on the gas, and the thyroid is kind of sluggish and requires more stimulation to function normally. So it's like a pre-condition that maybe down the line, the thyroid will stop working adequately. So that's the origin of the subclinical hypothyroidism.
Just to clarify, are you saying that the subclinical is when the person is exhibiting symptoms, but the thyroid levels are low, or is it the opposite?
It's a blood test situation where the TSH is high, but the person has no symptoms.
Okay, okay.
So it's a chemical. I guess I could compare it to high blood sugar, where we call it glucose intolerance or pre-diabetes. The blood test tells you there's a problem with the physiology of this hormone, but it's not yet a clinical situation where there's consequences in terms of symptoms or complications. When people have hyperthyroidism, the common symptoms that we associate with this is fatigue, weight loss. Again, they have a faster metabolism. Their heart rates may be higher, and it may be with symptoms of anxiety. Or so a lot of times we have patients with anxiety symptoms or who are underweight, and we'll check the thyroid function. It's such a common condition also that sometimes it explains what metabolically is going on with a patient. Hypothyroidism, on the other hand, person may feel fatigue also, but we expect to see some weight gain and some intolerance to colder temperatures. they're not able to respond to cold temperature environments. Once we diagnose hypothyroidism, I usually, at this point, start thinking of sending to endocrinologists for a couple of reasons. One, we are busy and we don't want to become an endocrinologist in our ordinary practice. And then the other thing is they start having some interesting features that people need to be aware of. Does the patient have a thyroiditis? Is it Hashimoto's, which is the most common cause that brings patient to this kind of situation? And I wanted to really highlight the fact that some patients after giving birth will have some thyroid dysfunction. And as it says here, it's a temporary thing. And places where we use iodized salt, apparently in some places where people don't use iodized salt and where the salt that they use doesn't have enough iodine, it can manifest also where there's not enough iodine to make the protein, the hormone. So that's a dietary environmental cause. And then, as it mentions here, some people can be born with a thyroid that's not functioning. And to offset that, it's one of the screening tests for newborns in the hospital. I think before they leave the hospital, they get tested.
What supplements do you think that we should give to people with thyroid problems, especially if they're slow? And should it only be the thyroxine? I mean, thyroxine,
Apparently,
I feel that
yeah.
they get desensitized to it so fast. People are started on such high levels of Synthroid.
Yeah, I have no experience to rely on for this. I do know that levothyroxine is a synthetic supplement, and I know that some people take thyroid supplements that are like desiccated thyroid or something. And some patients swear there's a difference between taking the thyroid preparations from animal organs. I don't even think I know the animals it comes from, but it's thyroid extracts. And I think that one would probably be more likely to generate immune response rather than the medication, which is kind of semi-synthetic. Do you know if there's anything like that where patients would prefer which preparations?
Yes. I've personally had patients who like the natural versions of thyroid supplements.
Yeah, and when they get that, it's a mixture. It's like all kinds of things are. I don't know how much they can purify it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually I was diagnosed with hypothyroidism, but it was always on the low side of normal. You know, doctors were like, well, you're within the norm. But I was having symptoms, and I finally had a doctor that was brave enough to say, okay, let's treat you. And it made such a real big difference. And I also do use the natural preparations. I use Armour Thyroid or Nature Thyroid. I've been on it for, I don't know how long now, maybe 8, 9, 10 years or something. But it really made such a big symptomatic change.
And
Yeah, in going over the stuff to make this presentation, I didn't really look at the different preparations. We certainly saw it as a step forward when we were able to use semi-synthetic preparations. I'm not sure what I'm even basing this on. It's my impression that there's more problem with people staying on the natural stuff, probably because of immune reasons. They probably develop some kind of antibodies or something, but I'm not sure.
What were you saying, David?
Oh, I was going to ask Carlene if she knows what the derivation of her supplement is. Is it from a particular animal?
Yes, it's porcine. It's
Okay.
pork.
Okay, cool. And do they take the actual thyroid, or do they get it from just the meat? Do you have any idea how they derive it?
Yeah, it's they're supposed to get it from the thyroid of the pig, and it's ground up somehow. I happen to have a doctor that was like an allopathic that also had homeopathic. So she was like a very natural kind of thing. And so she was a big proponent of, and she was endocrine as well. She was a big proponent of natural. So that's why I went that way.
Interesting, interesting.
Yeah. And she's from Hopkins too. So it's not if she's a quack.
More annoying.
More.
All right. So
So
just to
that's
move along,
So my simple question, I'm not sure if I am subclinical or not. And I suppose one of the tricky things here is because I have fatigue, but I have fatigue because I sleep too little, is what I'm inclined to think. I don't seem to have much else in terms of symptoms, although I don't know. Maybe, and so I think I've been diagnosed for about 5 years. And I think I've lost maybe 5 pounds over those 5 years. I'm inclined to credit walking and exercising as opposed to the Synthroid, but maybe it is the Synthroid helping me. But my question is really, so let's assume that I'm subclinical. It progresses, and how quickly does it progress? What should I be anticipating, like over the next 5 years or decades?
actually, the notes that I have here really simplify the situation, probably to the detriment of the patients who might think they must be going crazy because people are telling them their labs are okay and they're not feeling okay. So number one, they say once you know you need replacement for life, and they're done. That's actually, it's one line. It becomes more interesting if you want to look at life on levothyroxine or life on thyroid replacement. There might be some interesting features, but in terms of public health, the right thing to do, life is pretty simple from the point of view of the doctor. You know, you're hypothyroid, you need replacement. They put you on it and they follow your TSH. Where endocrine questions start to sound like homeopathy or maybe even psychology is where we are dealing with patients telling us, I prefer my TSH to be lower than higher, or I can feel the difference, or this preparation is better for me than not. There's a lot of reliance on cooperation between what may sound like a reasonable patient and avoiding things that are clearly not rational. So that might be the difference that maybe Dr. Marcelin who had
yes.
a different kind of response from her practitioner. Some people can be dogmatic. They can
Yes.
say, you know, you have nothing, forget it, move on to something else. And others may be more hand-holding and more supportive about your experience.
Not that we want to get into personal, I'm just using this as an example. I had terrible cold intolerance and fatigue. And as I said, every time I would ask them, check my thyroid, it was always like 1 or 2 points within the norm, like not quite low, right? And they always said, oh, well, when you get a couple more points more, we'll treat you. So I ended up finding a doctor, coincidentally, and she was endocrine, and she said, you know what, we're going to just treat you. Symptoms got better. I was actually able to go skiing. I wasn't able to ski with my kids. I was like in pain. I was able to, I wasn't as tired. I wasn't as fatigued. And she was telling me that what she found was with the Synthroid actually many times will bring the numbers up to therapeutic doses, but the patients will continue to complain. And she started using the Armour Thyroid and the Nature Thyroid, and she found that the numbers, the therapeutic doses, and the symptomology was more consistent. and that it was like a more of a win-win, and that's what really sold her to go more the natural way. The problem is that she was saying is that for some people, because of religious reasons and such odd, that they may not be able to have the pork derivative. And that's where the synthroid came from in the first place, was because of that. And she was, sort of saying if they were to come up with another derivative from another animal that was similar to human, it would be maybe there would be some help in that. But she because of the symptoms and her belief that symptoms correlated better with the natural product is why she went that route.
Yeah, personally, I'm very agnostic about these things. I'll send patients to the endocrine. If they hit it off and they continue to see the endocrinologist, then I'm happy. If they come back to me and we follow the TSH, and that's how, we go on.
Yeah.
So
So I do like to tell my patients, and many times I explain to David also how thyroid in my mind, it is like the accelerator on your body. Like if your body was a vehicle that you're driving, the thyroid is the accelerator, which will send a Wi-Fi signal to the rest of your body and your cells at what level to metabolize energy. And sometimes if it is going very slow, so you're kind of feeling slow and sluggish, and it's only because the body is unable to produce the signal to every single cell. And sometimes when that signal is low, we have to give you exogenous, that same kind of a signal, so that your body can come up to speed again. And sometimes when you're driving your body to at like 100 miles per hour every single day, all the time, you will tire it out again. And there will be, because also as you get older, the oxidative stress on the body at a cellular level increases, it doesn't decrease. So basically life gets harder as you go deeper into it. So that's why we have to keep adding some exogenous, not only thyroid, whether it is derived from a natural source or from a pharmacological source. And then we have to somehow also decrease the oxidative stress on your body. So that is something that I like to supplement with some other supplements that are as naturally sourced as possible, which are some vitamins and minerals and nutrients, which I think help a lot to mitigate the symptoms that people face. But then I totally agree with Dr. Perez, where he says that, this is something that once they tell you, we have been unable to cure it, and then you have to take the supplement pretty much all your life.
Sounds almost as bad as caffeine.
Exactly. So it's like caffeine, so caffeine also is like a supplement. If I don't take caffeine, I probably will feel like a hypothyroid also.
And can you treat your hypothyroid with caffeine, or is it not?
I don't think so. Yeah, it won't respond, because the weight gain, the hair loss, all of that. And then the other thing is that for some people, I see that because of whatever oxidative stress that was caused in their system, sometimes no amount of medication is enough. I mean, they start using, the endocrinologist will, every time you'll complain, they'll just increase your dose until you're at the max doses. The other thing that is very important with thyroid, and maybe on a different lecture day with Dr. Perez, we'll go over that, is that thyroid is going to be a problem for a lot of people who are using obesity medications, especially right now with semaglutide or Manjaro, or like Slim Shots. We use Slim Shots. So one of the side effects, and actually the black box more warning on that, is because it is something that will impact that accelerator, that little muscle, that bow tie that Dr. Perez was showing earlier. That so it can cause cancer in those areas when you're on very high doses of those medications. So it's good to know about thyroid. I'm glad that because of David's birthday, we
I want to say especially thank you, Michael. I really appreciate you taking the time to prepare this and educate us about this. I'm worried that my birthday doesn't cause other people to suffer. And we've got a bunch of people here who might not be as interested in hypothyroidism as I am.
Everybody should know about thyroid problems, and that is one of my thing is to find reasons to come together and learn. So David, I have been very fortunate that he teaches us all the time. So today was a day that was a good day for us to give you back.
I love it.
Thank you, Dr. Perez, and
All
thank
right.
you, everyone. I'll see you guys soon, and give us suggestions of what should be the next topic.
You
All
got
right.
it.
Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Perez. Happy
Sounds
birthday.
good. And happy birthday,
Okay.
David.
Happy birthday, David.
Thanks, Sophie.
Bye.
Enjoy. Thanks,
Thanks,
Sophia.
Dr. Perez.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.